Hi everyone, I'm Sharon. This is Heritage Journals and I'm really glad you're here with me today. Today we're going to be working on a few projects that use fabric for the inside of our slow stitch journal. And the first one is a little bit of an experiment for me. So we'll see how it works out, but I think it'll be really cool if it does. So where I'm going to put this is on this page. And originally I was going to do something else here, but we'll put that in a different part of the journal. The reason I want to use this page is because I always have a little extra space in the middle of my journal between the signatures, because I always leave a little bit of space for the binding. And this is going to be a little bit of a thicker item, so we're going to actually do a belly band on this page. And it's just because it's going to be a bit thicker, I wanted to have a little bit of extra room. So that's always a good thing to keep in mind. If you need to put thicker items in on either side of the pages where the signatures join, is a good place to put them because you generally have a little bit more room there. So that's what we're going to be working on today. Now, I've always thought fabric flips were really cool. And so I thought we'd do this belly band as kind of a take on a fabric flip. So what I've done, pull this back in. What I've done is taken some file folder. I had yellow, but you can use any color. It doesn't have to be yellow. And I've cut two pieces of it and glued them together so that it's quite sturdy and thick. And the width of it is 2.5 inches wide. And then what I've done is put the height of the page, and you can ignore this top part. I'm still deciding whether I want to turn it into a little tab that's going to stick out the top of the journal, or if I'm just going to cut it off. I haven't decided yet. But in any case, yours needs to be at least the height of the page, or sometimes slightly less if you want a little bit of breathing room there. And then I've put these lines on the top of the bottom just to indicate where I'm going to be stitching the fabric onto the page, or the belly band onto the page, so that we don't put anything in those spaces that we really want to see, because it's going to have stitching over it. I've also marked the top and the bottom. So let me show you what the idea is, and then we'll see if we can make it work. So fabric flips, my understanding anyway, the main reason for them, aside from just being pretty, is that they're for hidden journaling. So with this, because this is a nice thick heavy page of, or cardstock, you can actually journal right on here if you want to. I'm going to add probably this little lighthouse here somewhere on here, just as a little bit of a decoration. And then I've cut two pieces of paper the same width as the belly band, and a little bit shorter. And we may actually need to shorten these even a little bit more depending on how things go, but it's always better to have more and cut it down than to not have enough. So I've put two pages right next to the cardstock because that'll be the easiest writing surface. And then we're going to kind of layer it with the fabric and the paper. So what I've done here is taken some of the extra pieces of fabric and cut them, maybe I'll just take out that pin, and cut them 2.5 inches wide, which is exactly the same width as the cardstock and as the paper below it. And I don't want it to be just one piece of fabric, because I want it to have a bit of that patchier look and be able to do some stitching in between and decorate it a little bit. So I've chosen these two pieces for the first layer, and what I'm going to do is overlap them a little and stitch them together, probably with some kind of a decorative stitch. And then I'm going to actually add this little bow in the middle, so that when you there's going to be layers on top of this, so when you flip them up, you kind of get this pretty little surprise. And then there's more journaling even below that. Now, the one thing I will say is, because these are going to have, is that upside down? That's upside down. Because the fabric itself is not easy to write on, you will need to have a writing board in your journal if you decide to do this type of a project and you want to actually use it as a writing space. So I will be making a writing board for this journal so that it can be tucked under if you want to write above it, because it's going to be hard with, you know, the fabric and the decorations and all those things make it more difficult to write on the paper. So the next layer is going to be a piece of paper. And then I'm going to have one more layer of fabric. And you'll see again, I've got this quite long. I'm going to trim that afterwards. So we've got these two pieces of fabric that I kind of like together. I'm just overlapping them and I'm going to sew them together. And then on this one, I'm going to cut out this cute little duckling and add that to the center and make that pretty. And then we'll add one more piece of paper, and then the top layer is going to be this boat with some of this fabric below it and a piece of lace in the middle, because what this lace is going to become is a buttonhole. And the reason I wanted to do it on lace is that lace doesn't fray as much generally as fabric does. And I don't want to have to do a binding around it. I just want to be able to cut a little slit and use it as a buttonhole. So the idea is that the button, all of these other pieces are going to be cut short enough that we can sew the button to the back and then have the button go through here to hold all of these pages down, so that it will be, so that they don't kind of move all over the place when the journal is flipped, because of course fabric is kind of floppy. So I wanted something to hold it down. And I think having a button there, I'm going to use this yellow button, will look pretty, and it'll also hold it down. So that's the idea. Now for this top piece, you need a longer piece at the top. So this, you'll see this piece of fabric is quite long, and then a shorter piece at the bottom, and then a gap in the middle with some lace. So I'll show you the other side of this. Maybe I'll just move all of these so you can kind of see that this is a gap, and that's what it looks like on the back. So it will need to be trimmed, but I want to do that after so that I can see where the button is actually going to need to be, and then I'll decide where the top and the bottom are going to be. So in some ways we're going to be working a little bit backwards on this, but we'll see how it goes. And the other thing I'm going to do is, once I get the lace sewn on, I'm not going to worry about making this a fancy stitch, because I think it would be pretty to add on a piece of this sparkle trim on the top and on the bottom of the lace, and then we'll have the button in the middle. So when you're getting ready for this, what you need to do is basically cut everything to be 2.5 inches wide. You can join as many pieces of fabric as you want. I think 2 is kind of easier than trying to add too many, but that's totally up to you if you want to add more. And the only place that it really matters about the length is on the very top piece. You want to have the lace near the bottom, not right at the bottom. You still want to have a little bit of fabric beyond it. And we will trim this once we get the button put on. But you want to have this in a place where it makes sense to have the button. And so you don't want it in the middle, because then your writing space is going to be much lower. So you want a longer piece at the top, a piece of lace, and then a piece of something else below it. So what I'm going to do now is go off screen, and I'm going to sew this together and start assembling it. Maybe what I'll do is I'll sew that together, and then I'll sew all of the other fabric pieces together and add on the decoration, the embellishment to them. And once I get that done, I'll come back and show you how to put the whole thing together. And hopefully when you see the whole thing put together, it'll make more sense, because I'm not sure that this description totally makes sense yet, but I think once you see it come together, then it will. All right, so I'm going to go do that now, and then I will be back. Good morning. It is the next day, and I am back with this belly band. I did work on it for a while last night, and I learned a lesson that I thought I would share with you. So originally, the lace that I had used, do I have it here? It was this kind of a lace, which looked really pretty, but this lace is kind of stretchy, and it has these big areas where there really isn't any structure. And so once I got it sewn on, it wasn't holding its shape on the edges. It just kept kind of ripping apart. So that didn't work. So I cut it off, and I'm going to use this lace instead. And this lace it's just a little bit, it's got just a bit of a starchy or heavier feel to it, more structure. And pardon me, it also has these flowers in it that I'm going to use. I'm going to kind of put them so that they land right on the edge, because where there's a little bit more stitching, there's a bit more structure. And I just don't want it to start ripping and tearing and falling apart on the edges there. So I'm going to sew this on, and then we'll see how that works when I go to add the buttonhole. All right, another thing that I learned that I wanted to share is that it's easier to sew things together with the fabric in the background so that you can line up the edges. I found that if I was trying to leave that space in between where the buttonhole is going to be, it was hard to line up the edges of the fabric and get them just right. So if you just lay your fabric underneath, make sure that this piece is, has some extra length. And then after I sew it, then I'm going to go behind and trim off the fabric to give us that gap. So I'll show you what I mean as I'm sewing, but this is an easier way just to hold it and make it work. All right, so that's sewn on now. So now I'm going to take and trim it, and let's see how this is going to work. Now I'm going to use my quilt ruler and my rotary cutter to trim, but if you just have scissors, just use that. You don't have to have a rotary cutter. It's just what I have handy, and I find it nice and quick. And then if we flip it over, you'll see there's this extra piece of fabric here. So if we cut that off, then we're going to have this little section here that we can use for a buttonhole. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to kind of fold it and just finger press it here to give myself a nice crease, because I want it to look straight from the front side, so that when I cut it off, we're going to get that straight line. So you can, even though my stitching isn't perfectly straight, if we make the fabric cut straight, then the whole thing is going to look straight. Try not to cut the lace as you're going. Make sure you pull it back. Let me find a piece of paper here so that you can see it better. So yeah, you can see on the front that line is, the line underneath is pretty straight. The line up here is, it's fine. It's not super straight, but it'll work. And I haven't decided if I'm going to trim the extra lace off of the bottom yet, because I think that's actually quite pretty, but we'll have to see how long the whole thing ends up being first, and I'll go from there. But I am going to trim this top piece here, and I'll show you. You just fold it back so that the lace is sticking out. And give that a trim. And this is not perfectly straight, but I am going to put a piece of that red sparkly trim on top here, so we can straighten that out when we add the trim. All right, so now let's see how this all comes together. So I've decided I'm going to just take off this top tab piece. Sometimes I like doing that, but I feel like there's not enough other places in this journal that have the tabs sticking out of the top that I think it would look a little odd. So I'm just going to go do that. I'm going to, we'll leave everything else for now because we need to figure out where the button's going to go to start with. And actually, look at that. It's pretty much the exact length that we need it to be. That was totally an accident. So if I want my button to go right in the middle, we'll set it where we want it to go. And then let's see if we can make a mark below onto the cardstock. Let's see if that worked. Yeah, it did. You can see the little dots. So this spot that I originally thought the button was going to go is not where the button is going to go. So let's erase that. I do wish it was a little bit lower though. I wonder if we did that, we could pull it down just a touch. So what I've done here is if we pull it a little bit down on top of the card, this portion of the card at the very top that shows is going to have stitching on it to attach it to the page potentially, or at the very least just to make it look finished. So if I pull the fabric down a little bit, then that will still work. And then maybe I can move my button down a little bit. So let's just try that. Yeah, so it gave me a little bit of extra space there. Let's see if I can find a proper eraser. I don't know where it is right now, but I will find a proper eraser and erase all of these marks so that when we actually can use this as a pretty writing surface. And now I need to find my awl. Here we go. And I am going to actually poke through my buttonholes because this is a heavy cardstock. And I did find an old mouse pad that I can use to do that. So basically you just, when you have something soft below it, it's easier, much easier to just poke your holes. And they don't need to be huge, it's just to make it so that the needle will go through when you sew on your button. So I'm going to sew that on now, and then I'll come back and show you how it looks. All right, my button is now sewn on. You can see below I've sewn it right to the card. So I'm going to take my top piece here and line it up to that line on the top so that I can see exactly where the button sits in the middle here. And this is important because you don't want to cut your buttonhole too big, otherwise it's not going to keep it shut. So you want it to be just kind of that Goldilocks, right? The actual amount. So I can see that my holes go from this side of that flower petal to that side. So I'm going to just put a pin right there so I know which spot to start. And I'm going to just cut a very thin little line like that. So I don't know if you can see here that currently my hole is not very big. So let's see if that is going to stretch to go over the button or not. And you can see that it doesn't look like it's big enough yet, but it's not terrible. Like, it just needs to be a little bit bigger. So I'm going to go and take a little snip on each side to make it slightly bigger. And again, I'm just doing tiny snips because I don't want to accidentally get it too big. and then test it to see if it goes over. Still a bit too small. So another tiny snip that way and tiny snip this way. See, and that one works. It stretches, but that's okay. You don't want it to be too big, otherwise it's not going to hold together. So that's what the belly band is going to look like from the top. Potentially a little bit different down here, but we'll see. So now I think we can compile the rest of the belly band. Now what I'm going to do is take my pencil, because I don't want any of the other papers or fabrics below to come to show where this lace is below. So I want everything to stop. I'm going to just kind of pull it to the side and make a mark right about there. And that's where I want all of my under stuff to stop. So I'm going to take off this piece. You can see the mark where I want things to stop. And now I'm going to start layering. So we had the 2 sheets there. And what I'm going to do is line those up at the top. Oops, let's just start with one. Line those up at the top, and then down here, make a mark where I've got this other one, so I know my paper needs to be that short. And then I'm going to take all 4 pieces of my paper, and I'm going to trim them to the same length. And then I'm going to start adding them with just a little bit of glue, because I need them to hold into place so I can sew them. So we've got this line at the top of our card. It's just a very faint line, but it gives us an idea of where the stitching is going to go over the top. So I'm going to just put a little line of glue right below that. I'm going to add on my first piece of paper and just line it up with the sides. You want to, we want to remember that this is all going to be invisible from the top. So you want to make sure it's all inside the belly band. And you can kind of see just a teensy little bit of yellow around the edges. You wouldn't have to even see that much, but I just want to make sure it's not hanging over. And then on top of here, I'm going to do the same thing. Tiny little line of glue. All right, so we wanted to do 2 of those. And then next we had, I think it was this one. So you can see that I've just stitched the 2 pieces of fabric together and added a bow to the middle, which I think is cute. It does look a little bit wonky after I did the hand sewing, so before I glue it down, I'm just going to trim it a touch to make sure that it sits straight. And again, if you don't have a rotary cutter, you can just take a ruler and even flip it over and mark the back where the line is straight and trim it with your scissors. You don't have to do it on a rotary cutter or with a rotary cutter and a ruler. So that looks good, and we'll trim the fabric at the bottom after we get everything put together. I think that'll be the easiest way to go. So again, a little line of glue. Okay, then we're going to add another piece of paper. Then another piece of fabric. Let's see, this one came fairly straight. Might trim it just a tiny bit on this one edge. Right, then we're going to add our last piece of paper. And then our top piece. So you can see that this is quite thick. Whoops, let me show you here. There's quite a few layers of fabric and paper and cardstock there, which is why it's nice to put in between the signatures like we discussed earlier, where you've got a little bit of extra room. So once this is on, hopefully that glue will hold it until we get it stitched. So basically here's the top. Then you've got writing space, and again you'll need to use a writing board because of the fabric underneath. Then you've got another cute little flip that I sewed this little duckling on. Then you've got more paper. Then another pretty piece of fabric. Then you've got two pieces of paper and your yellow backing to add writing to. And when it's done, all of this will shut and hold it closed with that button. So the next thing we need to do is cut down the fabric. And I think the way that I'm going to do it is to flip it. Maybe I should have done this before. Well, you live and learn, you learn as you go, and that's okay. So, you know what, we'll do it this way. So flip up this top piece, and then just take your scissors, make sure you're not cutting anything below, and you want to line up your fabric with your paper. And snip across. And then you can flip those two pieces back and do the same thing with the piece below that. Line up your fabric with your paper. And just trim across. Now, theoretically, what should happen is when we put the button through the buttonhole here, whoops, this will hold everything closed. And it actually does. You can kind of wave it around and nothing is falling out. So that's just a way to make it a little bit more hidden. Now I'm going to flip this over because we don't need this extra piece of fabric below. But I kind of do like the lace. So what I might do here, take it off of the button. I might just take and go with my scissors and sort of follow the outline of the bottom of the lace here. And this will hang over a little bit on the page, which I think will be okay unless, so if once it's in the book, if I find it irritating to have this hanging over, then I'll trim it. but if it's not irritating, I actually think that'll be kind of pretty hanging over the bottom. So next, we want to make sure that it's not going to go anywhere. And to do that, I am going to pre-poke my holes before we sew on this, because this is thick. And I don't think there's any way a needle is going to go through that without some effort. So I think I'm going to start in the middle, and you'll see the edge of, you'll be able to see the edge of your paper because it's thick right there. And I'm just going to go in a little ways, maybe 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to start in the middle, and I'm just going to poke right through. Yeah, and it takes a bit of effort to poke it through. And I'm going to make the hole a little bit bigger so that it's easier to get through. And in fact, I might do it this way because it's easier to see. So now that you've got the first one, you can just make the other ones follow along in the line. And then I think we should do the same thing at the bottom. This will be easier because there's not so many pieces of fabric to go through. Okay, so that's done so far. Now let's take our journal and attach it. So we're going to put it on this page. So it will sit just like that. Oh, and actually I think that'll be fine with the lace hanging over a little bit. I think that looks really pretty. So we're going to attach it right in here. I'm going to pause here because I need to find some clips. So I found my clips, and this part, in order to get it sewn onto the back, I think it's important to have it clipped into place so that it doesn't move around while you're trying to sew. And in fact, the other thing I'm going to do is add some glue right to the top so that we're just sort of double covered. So I'm using art glitter glue. Fabric would work, or whatever glue you have would work. It's just to give it a little bit of extra strength here. And I'm not going to put it over top of the holes because that'll make the holes more difficult to sew, but just to kind of give it some strength there. And I'm also going to do the same thing at the bottom, just above the holes. Oh, and I just realized what I forgot to do here. That's going to get in the way of tucking things in, so I'm just going to take and stick a little piece of fabric over top of that. Make sure that I've got the edges of the fabric glued down well. You could use washi tape for that or whatever you have. This is just what I had close by. All right, and then we take and flip this over, line it up to the top of our page where we want it to go. And then to the bottom. Make sure it's even. Mine is a little bit crooked, so we can adjust it a touch here. And then once you get the top exactly where you want it, clip it in place. And that'll help the glue to dry in the right spot as well. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom. All right, so while that's drying, we can get our needle threaded for doing the blanket stitch, because I'm going to do a blanket stitch through all these holes on the top and the bottom. And I'm going to use red thread, and I'm going to use the full thickness. I'm not sure that that's long enough, and I want to make sure to do it all in one piece. So I'm going to cut myself a longer piece of thread. I won't throw that other one out because I will use it for something else. Okay, and I'm only going to knot it once because I want to be able to hide this knot. So just make sure that it's really tight, this knot that you've made. And then don't trim it too short, but trim it so that it only has a fairly small tail. You can see there. And by this point, the glue should be dry because our glitter glue dries really fast. So take your clip off, and you can see there aren't holes poked through the very last piece of paper, and that's okay. The needle will go through that. So what I'm going to do, because this is actually not easy, I don't know, can you see on camera? You can kind of see it's not super obvious because of the dark color of my fabric, but you can see little kind of where the holes have been poked. So you have an idea of where they've been poked. And you can, I'm going to start on the edge and work across. Hi everyone, this is Future Editing Sharon. I just wanted to let you know there's going to be an odd break in the video here because the first way I tried to sew the belly band to the paper didn't work correctly, and I don't want you to have to watch all the things that I went through to try to fix it. So I'm going to pop you to the section of the video that shows how to attach the bottom of the belly band, and that is actually the correct way to do it, and you can just do that on the top as well. And you should probably start with the top still, but you want to attach it in the same way as I show you how to attach the bottom. Thanks. All right, I wanted to show you how to start properly. When I did it at the top, you probably saw that I had that weird thing happen here, and I realized what I was doing was that you don't want to start your stitch coming out of the hole. You want it to start from the very top of the page in order to get your proper blanket stitch. So what I did was I still put a knot in my thread, left quite a long tail, probably about 1 inch long, and then I just lifted the side of my belly band, and I don't know if you can see or not, I sort of tucked it in behind, in between the belly band and the paper, in between the belly band and the paper, and pulled it so that the knot sits about here. You can feel it with your thumb. And then the thread comes straight up from the hole out of the top. And then I put some glue in there just to hold it in place. And the other thing I did was I took my awl, although you can use a piece of paper for this as well, and I just sort of gently pushed the tail up toward, sorry, you couldn't really see that because my hand was in the way. I just gently pushed the tail up toward the holes, and it won't come out. I've tried putting paper in and out of it, and it doesn't come out after that's done. So once you've got your thread coming out at the right place, this should work much better. So you still go down through that hole you created. I knotted the wrong end of my thread. There we go. So that when you're, whoops, I don't know why that twisted. All kinds of problems today. All right, and then you want to go in from behind so that when your stitch is done, you're still coming out from the very top. And then when you do your next stitch, and by the way, the bottom is far easier to do than the top because you only have a couple layers of paper. You don't have all those other thick layers. Then when you come out from the top, you'll see that your blanket stitch works. You still get the proper thing going across the top. So that's how you do that. So I'm going to go finish that and then I'll be back. So I finished going across the bottom of the belly band, and I just want to show you how I'm going to finish it off. So I did make my knot right at the top, and I'm going to do basically the same thing I did at the beginning and take and tuck my needle in between the back paper and the belly band, and I'm just going to push my needle through to the other side of the belly band, which is here somewhere. And on this side, I want to make sure that the thread is pulled in behind so that the knot kind of is just, it will just kind of sit at the top there, but it's not very visible. And then what I'm going to do is just put a little bit more glue in between those and hold them until it catches, and then trim this thread and do the same thing and just tuck the thread up to the top with my awl. So that's how you'd finish it off. And I'm just going to show you the last piece I'm going to do, which is to attach this sparkly trim over top of where I've got the stitching, because I don't love how that looks. I think it looks, yeah, it just doesn't look finished to me. So I'm going to attach this over the top, and I'm just going to do that with glue. I'm just going to glue it on with Fabri-Tac. The one thing I'm going to really watch is not to get too low so that it interferes with the buttonhole. So I'm just going to glue it right to the very edge of where the fabric shows below. So I'll just show you how I do that, and make sure you, if you do something like this, make sure you put something underneath so that you're not gluing or getting a messy thing on your paper below, or your fabric below. So I'm just going to do that. Set that down like that. Let it set and dry, which doesn't take very long with Fabri-Tac, and then I'm just going to trim it off, and then that will be done. So this is finally finished, and I am really happy with how it turned out. There are a couple of changes that I had to make, so I'm going to show you what those are. To begin with, even though I was conscious of it, I did glue this piece of red trim too far down, so you can see that you still can see a little bit of the backing from the fabric below through, and that's okay. I actually don't think it's as noticeable as I thought it was going to be. I put it on, and then when I put the button through the hole, I realized that there wasn't room here for the button, and it was kind of just making an odd shape. So fortunately my Fabri-Tac wasn't really dry yet, so I was able to pull that off. So when you're doing it, if you're going to put a piece of trim on the top, what I suggest is put your button through the hole first, and then add your trim on top so you can see where the button ends, and you know it's not going to be bumping into your button. So that was one of the changes that I made. You'll see on the top here, I still don't love how this turned out because I didn't realize what I'd done wrong until I got to the bottom, but I can live with it. I've kind of just sort of glued the top corner in place there. I don't mind it. It's one of those things that, again, you learn as you go, and I do find that coming up against some of these problems and figuring out how to solve them is, for me, one of the best teachers, and it does make me more creative as well. So I'll show you now how this finished one works. So you'll see with the button closed, it is, you know, there definitely is some thickness here, but because of where it's located in the journal, once the journal is closed, you really can't even tell where the thickness is. So that works well. And when you open the button, and when you're using the buttonhole, just be gentle. You know, it still is lace, and it still is, you know, can rip if it's yanked. So just be gentle with it as you go. So there's how it's opened. And the other thing I did was I didn't like how this looked down here. There was too much of this big yellow strip. It just didn't look finished to me, so I just added a strip of this fabric here, and I think it finishes it up nicely. So when you flip that open, oh, I guess I'll take and probably glue that little thread tab in. You've got writing space there. Then you've got another cute little fabric flip surprise. Then you've got writing space there. And another pretty little fabric flip. And then 2 pages of writing space, plus the actual background of the journaling card, or the Bellyband cardstock that you can write on. So there's a lot of journaling space. And it's easy to close. You just pull it all down, gently close the button, smooth it down, and there you go. And when I did do the shake test on it, so held it on its edge, give it a good shake, and it didn't move. It's still held in place nicely. So I'm really happy with how this turned out. I think it's a fun little interactive addition to a journal, and definitely something I'm going to be doing again in the future. So I hope you guys have enjoyed it and not found it too frustrating. The one thing in hindsight that I would change is I would probably not sew it directly to the page. I mean, it's fine. I don't love how that looks, but it's not hideous. But it was really fiddly and difficult. So I think what I would do the next time is do the blanket stitching on the belly band, on the top and the bottom, before I attach it to the page. So I would do that so it had the look of it, and then I would just use Fabri-Tac and glue it down so that it was very secure, and then clip it so that, you know, the Fabri-Tac dries very tightly, and it's not going to go anywhere. Or the other alternative would be, if you made this before you bind your journal, you could use your sewing machine and sew it on the top and the bottom. But if you want that slow stitch look, I would just do it before you stick it down and then just glue it down, because that would make things far easier than the way that I chose to do it. I do like the way this looks, but it is a lot more work. So you always learn as you go. Anyway, that's how this one is going to work. And now we're going to go on to another belly band, which I've done for myself before, and is one of my favorite belly bands to do. So I'm going to flip over to that now. So I've decided to end this video here today. I had intended to go through at least 2 more projects, but this video is already getting very long. So I'm going to cut it off here, and then in my next video, I'll show you the other projects that we were going to work on to finish this journal, which also use fabric. So I hope that you've enjoyed working with me on this project and creating this Fabric Flip Button Bellyband. I think that's what I'm going to call it, although that certainly is a mouthful. So thanks so much for being with me here today. I hope you're enjoying creating your journal, and until I see you next week, happy stitching!